What was the most recent thing someone casually said to you that shocked you with how out of touch they are with the female experience? I always talk about how I love the city at night and how I wish I could take midnight walks. A dear friend said, "Why don't you?" And when I pointed out how dangerous it was, his reply was, "Just don't take your phone. Then you don't have to worry about being robbed." Laughing face. One time I got up a little too fast while getting something from under a table and hit my boobs while on the way up. My friend panicked and he immediately asked if we needed to go to the emergency room to get checked out. I said no and asked why he thought so. He thought my breasts would explode and my nipple would fall off to allow the gallons of milk I stored to seep out. Deadpan face. All I did in the 10 minutes after he told me that was blink. Went on a date with a guy in the medical field. He told me that because mitosis, the process of cells separating, is an involuntary process, growing and birthing a baby really isn't that much effort for women. He also believed that women and men put in the same amount of effort for the birthing of a child. I always find it amazing how many guys think that growing a human from a single-cell organism to a stage in the life cycle where they can survive on their own is easy. For 9 months, a woman's body literally supports 2 whole human lives. There is nothing easy about it. My 50Y0 male coworker invited me, 31F, to attend a salsa party with him. I told him that I generally don't go to places with a lot of men under the influence of alcohol without my fiancé because I don't want to be Dr. GGED or SOD. He then asked me how I could be so arrogant to assume random men would be so interested in me that they'd go to these lengths to get with me. When I responded, "I've had that happen to me more than once and I don't want to go through that again," he started asking me invasive questions about the incidents to determine if he'd consider the things that happened to me assault. I hit back with the most graphic trauma dump of what happened to me and made him so uncomfortable that he had to step out for a bit. He did end up apologizing for his behavior and we now just generally ignore each other. Coworker and I were at a Mexican restaurant during lunch midweek, which made it mostly men and me and the waitresses. My coworker was having a not all men moment while I listened patiently. When he finally took a breath I said, "Okay, sure. Do me a favor. Look around and tell me which one I'm supposed to be scared of." He looked surprised then looked around before answering, "How should I know?" I just smiled and said, "Exactly, I actually saw the light bulb click on in his head." Oh, thank you for the awards. A light-hearted one, but I was pretty surprised when men in the office began claiming the women's bathroom was very fancy strictly because we had a box of tampons. My brother legitimately thought women could walk into an obgyn to get a hysterectomy whenever we want if we don't want kids. El Mao. Was being chatted up by 2 American guys and I brought up the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Their response? It's not really a big deal because women can just drive over state lines to get an abortion. I had a guy laugh at me for being upset about Roe versus Wade being overturned because I live in a state that still is relatively easy to get an abortion. I was so disgusted with his flippant attitude about millions of women losing their rights and we got into a huge argument about it. Needless to say, I don't talk to that guy anymore. Pants sizing. I was talking to a male coworker and somehow it came up that women's clothing sizes are whack. I think I was griping about inconsistent sizing. I mentioned how I wish I could buy pants by the waist and length, like how men's are sized. He asked, "Well, why don't you?" "Because women's pants aren't labeled like that." "Well, why don't you just get ones that are?" "Because men's pants are sized like that, not women's." "Why don't you just buy men's?" "They don't fit me right." "So why don't you buy women's?" "I do, that's the whole point. I wish they were sized in a way that made sense, and not just some arbitrary numbers. I'm different sizes in different brands." He just couldn't understand that women's pants are cut differently, and that just buying men's pants wouldn't work for me. My ex-BF was convinced that if a woman miscarried a child, it was because she didn't truly wanted it on some deep down level. I still get so mad thinking back to that moment. It's like when a man has a heart attack. It's because deep down they just want to stop living, and definitely nothing to do with what I put in your coffee. I got my period while hanging out with my then boyfriend. He said, "Why can't you just use a Q-tip?" A male friend genuinely asked if feminism was still a thing. One of my male doctors recently told me "You're 29, not 19 anymore" to explain my symptoms of extreme pain and fatigue among other things. Spoke to a female doctor next. She suspects it's fibromyalgia. He phrased it rather more graphically. So this is the cleaned-up gist. Surely there must be times when a woman is attacked and just tells the guy to put the knife down because she's up for it anyway. On a side note, it honestly amazes me how many people think rape is simply a man desperately wanting sex. As if it has nothing to do with inflicting violence and power over someone else. Women don't love their man unconditionally, like no shit. If you kill my puppy and fuck my mom I will leave you. How very shocking. Several male friends have asked me recently why I will only go running when it's light out. They are also very confused by why I don't have earphones in when I go hiking. It's not so much the confusion that bothers me, it's when I explain but they really just don't get it. I'm met with disbelief. I wanted to take Plan B after having unprotected sex and he said why don't we discuss that in a few weeks. My younger brother tried to mansplain how to deal with endo bloat to me once LMAO. When I told my ex that I have my period for about 7 days, the last 2 to 3 very light bleeding, he told me to go to the doctor about that because 7 days are just too long. He just didn't want to wait 7 days until I was ready to have sex again. I had to explain to my father why I prefer to take a packed bus at midnight over taking a taxi. That was kinda sad because it was my dad but he genuinely had no clue. One time a taxi driver tried to take my drunk ex-girlfriend to a random place, and she noticed and kept asking him to go the correct way. The driver got all mad at her and he dropped her off in a random empty parking lot off the highway at 3 a.m. and she had to call me to pick her up. I was so incredibly angry. He could have assaulted her and then left her in another dangerous place impaired where she could have been assaulted. I was nervous having to come pick her up cause I had to search. She didn't really know where she was, and I'm a small woman myself. Me. Lists several other factors that might impact a situation me. And also, maybe gender could have had a bit of an impact? Man. No.